So let me tell you a series of two stories from the end of the book of Judges. This begins in chapter 17, I believe, and runs to the very end of the book. And these stories are connected both by event but also by a key phrase. And here is the phrase, and it is repeated verbatim with both stories. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so the question is that a good thing that there was no king in Israel and everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes, or was that a bad thing? And we can't know this until we read the stories and we hear the stories. So here they go. The story starts out with a Levite named Micah. And Levites were the priestly clan of ancient Israel. And this Levite had some silver, and he brought the silver to a silversmith and had an idol made. So he could set it up and have like a shrine that would presumably not only bring godly favor to his family, but perhaps create economic activity for the family as well, because people would come and want to worship at this shrine. Now this, of course, is a terrible thing. The first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. And the second commandment is, you shall make no graven images. So here's the priest, a priest of Israel, who is completely getting the commandments of God wrong. And soon after this incident is related, the scripture says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Clearly, Israel needed a king in those days, because even the priests were running around committing great acts of disobedience against God. And then the story continues, and there's a whole episode about the tribe of Dan looking for land because they did not have land, and there's some intrigue that goes with that. And then as the story progresses, there is a traveler who is coming through the city gates of a town, and a Levite invites the traveler to come in and stay with him because it's late and he needs a place to stay. He is providing hospitality. And so the visitor stays with him, and he's getting up ready to leave, and the Levite says, no, have something more to eat and drink, and please stay here, and stay another day. And this goes on for a couple of days. And finally the traveler gets up to leave and says, no, I really must leave now. And as he's getting ready to leave, some men of the community come knocking on the door of this man's house and say, we are here to rape this visitor. And now this is a terrible abomination because it involves sexual assault. It involves same-sex relations, which in those days were not a thinkable activity, especially one that would be forcible. And third, it is the antithesis of hospitality that this man has been showing the visitor. And the citizen pleads with his neighbors and say, please do not do such a thing. No, they say. And so he throws the concubine out of the door to these men, who in turn rape her all night long. It's a horrible, dreadful story. No details are spared, and it is made out to be as gruesome as it sounds. And the next morning she has come crawling back to the threshold of his door and has died there. And he is so appalled and so put off by what has happened that he then, and this is gross, I know, I'm sorry, but he cuts her body into 12 pieces and sends one piece to each of the tribes of Israel to show what has happened. Now you need to know that the tribe that has perpetrated this great evil is the tribe of Benjamin, the same tribe from which Ehud came from earlier, where it was a very honorable tribe. At this point, they are seen as a very despicable group of people. And this is a declaration of war to send these pieces of this body around. This is what the tribe of Benjamin is doing to Israel. It is tearing the nation apart limb from limb because they are so disobedient and not following God's commandments to welcome the stranger and to deal all people with peace and with equity. And so all the tribes of Israel gather their armies together, and there's a long description of the war between the tribes of Israel and Benjamin, and the tribe of Benjamin is almost completely wiped out. There are a couple hundred of them left, but that is it. And that's the end of that story. So it's this gruesome story. It starts with this one Levite creating an idol, not living according to the commandments of God. It moves to this terrible act of inhospitality, of sexual assault and violence and murder, and then a declaration of war and a near genocide of the tribe of Benjamin. Now, these are not the kinds of stories that we learned in Sunday school. We rarely learn the stories from the book of Judges because they are too gruesome and they're too troubling. And these are the very sorts of stories that make us not want to read the Bible. But here we are confronted with it, and I think that line, "In those days there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes," helps us begin to deal with that story. So we read that whole episode, starting with the creation of the idol and all the way through the genocide against the tribe of Benjamin, or the near genocide. And that phrase hangs over us heavy, with a real sense of judgment. There was no king. That was a terrible time when there was no king. People were acting horribly. The priests were creating idols. People who knew better were wanting to assault and violate strangers, and then did assault and violate the concubine, and war was declared, and one of the tribes of Israel, one of the 12 tribes of God's chosen people, were wiped out almost to the point of extinction. There was no king. Everyone was doing what was right in his own eyes, and it was terrible. That's the end of the first part of the story. It is gruesome, it is troubling, and quite frankly, we'd rather look away. Now the story picks up again. The 11 tribes get together and say, "Oh my gosh, we have a problem. The tribe of Benjamin is about to disappear. What is Israel without 12 tribes? We need the tribe of Benjamin back." But all the women have been killed. There's only 300 or 400 men left. What do we do? And especially because we made a vow and we said, none of our wives women will we ever give to them in marriage. That would be unthinkable that we would give them wives. So we can't do that. We are just stuck. Gentlemen, what are we going to do? And they sit around and think about it. And one of them says, we're having that harvest festival coming up soon. What if we invite the tribe of Benjamin there, and we do our sort of do-si-doing with the women of our tribes, and out when the men of Benjamin come by to pick a wife, we'll just withdraw, and all the women will go to them. We won't give them to them, they will take them, but that will enable them to repopulate, and we won't break our vows, but we will hold the nation together. Let's do that. And so that's what they do. They have a festival, and they solve their problem. And they solve it in some ways very graciously. Now, I know some of you are thinking, not so gracious if you're one of the women who gets stuck with one of these Benjaminites. Where's their choice in this matter? And of course, culturally in those days, there wouldn't have been. Marriages were not love affairs created between two people who would fall in love and date. They were contracts set between families, almost always worked out by the males of the families. Women were moved back and forth as property. We can't get past that cultural point and just excuse that away. We don't repeat it nowadays, so we're not stuck with that form. But that was the norm of that time. So we need to work with that culture, what was expected and what happened then. So we do need to overlook that part of the story, and in one sense we explain it away, that part of it anyway, because culturally we're in a very different place where women are treated and women are afforded and are believed to have their own moral agency, can enter contracts, relationships, start businesses, can divorce and remarry without permission of other people. And that is, of course, one of the great changes of the last number of hundreds of years as the rights of women have increased. And we still are not to true parity between men and women, but of course it's much better. But if we get hung up on that point, we're going to miss the point of the story. So let's jump beyond and look at what has happened. The people who have slaughtered the tribe of Benjamin almost to the point of extinction and have vowed never to give them women, never to allow them to repopulate, are very sorry that they have done that. And they find, if you will, a sort of elegant way to back out of the problem that helps them preserve face, but also helps the tribe of Benjamin to flourish and saves the nation. And that story, which is a very lovely story, if you will, of what one of my professors called homemade grace. God doesn't tell them how to do this. They have to kind of make it up. And if you read it in chapter 21 of Judges, there are some little lovely touches where, you know, that festival at Shechem, which was one of the main worship parts of the U.S., or I mean of Israel. That would be like saying, well, we should all go to the capital. You know that place, it's called Washington, D.C. It's over in the east. We all know that, but it's, you see them kind of working this out on their own, and they affect their plan, and lo and behold, it works, and the tribe of Benjamin is saved, and the nation is held together after this terrible, terrible calamity. And the last line of the book of Judges is, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And in this instance, it's okay that there was no king in Israel, because people knew what was right. They knew what was required of them. They knew how to solve problems, how to bring the nation back together again. And it was a good thing that there was no king, because the people did have a moral compass. It's a fascinating contrast in stories. One is the sort of conclusion, if you will, of the other. In the first case, it's a terrible thing that there was no king in Israel. And in the second story, it was fine because people knew what was right. Two stories that push in very different directions, have very different commentary about people, that use the same line that means the opposite thing, and yet they're both true. A fascinating study in contrasts of two stories that are put right next to each other in Scripture. Take a couple minutes and just share your thoughts and reflections, and then you'll come back for a conclusion.